What's up guys, I'm Rihanna, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the major beef between Jane Roe and Henry Wade in a court case from almost 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade. A lot has happened since then, and so just to sum it up for you real quick before we get into all the details, in the case of Roe v. Wade, a widely debated and super controversial case by the way, one that's especially relevant today, Norma McGorvey, or more well known as Jane Roe, became pregnant in Texas in 1972. Having already had 2 children prior and a history of drug and alcohol abuse, she wanted an abortion. However, Texas had a ban with few exceptions with threat to life. Her attorneys Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey filed a lawsuit against her local district attorney, Henry Wade, trying to deem the law as unconstitutional. The lower court totally dogged on Wade, but the parties still appealed the case to the Supreme Court. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision in favor of Roe again, dogging on Wade for a second time. Citing the due process clauses and the right to privacy clauses of the 14th Amendment, this ruling set the precedent of abortion access and restriction and the role of government in personal life. Despite the controversies, this remained the status quo until the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization in June of 2022. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the case, there's a little background you should know beforehand. Before the landmark case of Roe v. Wade, a series of events set a precedent for this historical and widely debated decision. For example, a case of the German measles swept the nation, leaving many babies that survived the disease in utero with severe disabilities. In addition to this, the Barnum Act that banned the use and even awareness of contraception for married couples was struck down in the case of Griswold v. Connecticut, in which Planned Parenthood executive Estelle Griswold was fined for violating. After appealing to the Supreme Court, they ruled in her favor and said that the Barnum Act was unconstitutional as it infringed on the right to privacy. This represented a shift in American culture that is synonymous with one more open to abortions and fewer limitations on individual liberties. Now, let's talk about Norma Lee Nelson, or better more well known as Jane Roe. Born in 1947 as Norma Lee Nelson, Jane Roe suffered a rough childhood, having been abandoned by her father at age 9 and abused by her mother. After being sent to several boarding and private schools, Nelson was sent to live with a distant relative of her mother's. There, she was sexually assaulted several times over a 3-week period before finally being allowed to return home. She took up a job as a waitress at a local restaurant where she met her ex-husband, Woody McGorvey. Upon finding out she was pregnant, however, McGorvey would beat and abuse Norma until she was forced to leave him. Jane Roe, now Norma McGorvey, gave birth to her first daughter, Melissa, at 18. Coming to terms with her sexuality as a lesbian woman, McGorvey began to drink excessively. When her mother found out about her sexuality, she was outraged. One day, when Norma went out of town to visit a friend, her mother charged her with abandonment and took her daughter away from her. After entering her first relationship with a woman, McGorvey had an affair with a male colleague, where she became pregnant for the second time. This pushed her further into drug use, abusing acid and other hallucinogens. In 1969, Norma slept with a friend of hers and became pregnant for the 3rd time. Having suffered psychologically at the hands of abuse from her first 2 pregnancies, she sought out an abortion, but learned that the only accessible clinic had closed down just days beforehand. Meeting with attorneys Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, McGorvey sued the top Dallas District Attorney, Henry Wade, in order to challenge the constitutionality of the Texas law. Out of fear, however, Norma undertook the pseudonym Jane Roe and claimed that she was raped, not wanting to be the face of a landmark case and rather just seeking her own protected abortion. Henry Wade, born as the 11th of 14 kids in 1914, became a Dallas County prosecutor in 1950 after studying at the University of Texas, joining the Navy, and being an FBI agent. Despite his loss in Roe v. Wade, he's probably more well known for persecuting Jack Ruby after he shot and killed John F. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, in 1963. Wade was a Democrat who worked for Lyndon Johnson at one point and never had any strong opinions against abortion. In fact, abortions were only typically persecuted if a back alley abortion had gone horribly wrong and the woman needed to go to the hospital and was willing to talk to the police. Only once a report was filed could they even be persecuted. He was sued, however, because he was the top law enforcement official in the county, with an impressively high conviction rate. Jane Roe's attorneys, Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, brought a class action suit against Henry Wade, the Dallas District Attorney, in a 3-judge court of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. That 3 times fast. They filed the suit on behalf of Norma McGorvey and all women who were or might become pregnant and want to consider all options. During the time of the case, McGorvey was 6 months pregnant, and on June 2nd, 1970, she gave birth to Shelley Lynn and put her up for adoption. Shelley Lynn would eventually become known as the Jane Roe baby. The Texas court ruled in favor of Roe, striking down the law. The court described it as overbroad and in violation of the 9th and 14th Amendments. They also cited the case Griswold v. Connecticut, which struck down the Barnum Act in advocating for allowing married couples access to contraception, which is later extended to unmarried couples as well. This set the precedent for a zone of privacy regarding people's decisions relative to family, sex, and other such personal issues that allowed a path for Roe v. Wade. However, although the law was declared unconstitutional, the court failed to immediately block the enforcement of it, and as a result, both parties appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, Weddington and Coffey argued that the right to an abortion is protected under the right to privacy in the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments, specifically citing the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. They described abortion as an essential right linked to other protected decisions regarding family, relationships, and bodily autonomy. The plaintiff, Jane Roe, also added that she was financially constricted by being forced to choose between having a child she doesn't want to have and a dangerous back alley abortion. The defendant, Henry Wade, argued that the right to life takes precedence over the right to privacy. The idea that life begins at conception had been around since 1930, as this replaced the original time of quickening belief, that life had begun once the mother could feel fetal movement, because of a new stethoscope technology that implied an earlier heartbeat and muscle movement. Wade also cited a New Jersey ruling in which a fetus's right to life was superior to the mother's right to freely practice her religions, and was required to submit a blood transfusion for its survival, even though her religion forbade it. Wade argued that the state had a compelling interest in protecting the life of the child. The case was argued on December 13, 1971 and October 11, 1972 to the 9 justices Warren E. Burger, William O. Douglas, William J. Brennan Jr., Potter Stewart, Byron White, Thurgood Marshall, Harry Blackmun, Lewis F. Powell Jr., and William Rehnquist. On January 22, 1973, in a 7-2 decision, the court ruled in favor of Roe, saying that the right to an abortion fell within the 14th Amendment's protections to right to privacy, but noted that although it's fully protected under the first trimester, states have leeway in their own legislation through the second and third trimesters. Justice Harry Blackmun wrote the majority opinion on the case, noting that although they disagreed with the plaintiff's argument for access to abortion at any point in a pregnancy, they have to balance the individual rights with state interests to protect the potential life of the unborn fetus. 2 justices held the dissenting opinion, William H. Rehnquist and Byron R. White. Rehnquist argued that the authors of the 14th Amendment did not intend for it to protect the right to privacy, especially not to the extent of a woman's right to an abortion, and rather it was intended for the purpose of unnecessary search and seizures. He added that the 9th Amendment was not applicable to their decisions and that the right to an abortion should be left up to the discretion of the state rather than made a federal protection. The case of Roe v. Wade is a historically significant case that has been heavily debated over the last near 50 years of its existence, until it was overturned in the Dawes v. Jackson Women's Health Organization in June of this past year. Despite an even larger shift and greater acceptance of abortions across the majority of Americans, Roe v. Wade no longer federally protects the right to an abortion in a 6-3 vote in the Supreme Court. This decision is also a hot-button issue and continues to be a driving factor in elections today, as is likely seen in cases forecasting a red wave of political candidates with an unexpected little turnout in return. In conclusion, Roe v. Wade continues to be a widely discussed topic in political campaigns and is a major dividing factor between parties and ideologies. With its recent overturning in Dawes v. Jackson, the future of abortions and abortion restriction continues to be a heavily debated issue and will likely be a driving factor in upcoming elections. As the spotlight remains on this topic, Americans will be paying close attention to future legislation in regards to abortion access and maternal care. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you have a good one.